Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we cover the 2024-2025 NBA season with some early NBA award predictions going into this upcoming season. I'm really excited for it. I hope you guys are as well. If you do enjoy today's content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and let's jump into that video preview here now where we look at my top 3 candidates for each NBA award. We're going to talk about who I could see winning and being finalists for the following: MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, the Sixth Man of the Year Award, Most Improved Player, Clutch Player, Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year, and then we're saving the best for last, Rookie of the Year. I think that's going to be one that is highly anticipated in this video. I'm sure a lot of you are excited and looking forward to hear my thoughts on the Rookie of the Year race. I'm going to come out with an all-rookie team video at some point here in the near future as well. But we are going to jump now into that MVP tier. Who are some MVP candidates that I could see this upcoming season? And there's a reason I started with this one specifically. The first player I want to mention is 3-time MVP out of the last 4 seasons. Big man for the Denver Nuggets, Nikola Jokic. And I think just including him in this list is very obvious. First of all, he's extremely durable. That is something you have to factor into all of these awards, is the minimum games played requirement that the NBA installed last year, playing 65 games per season. And there's also a minutes requirement listed with that as well. And I don't think enough people understood that last year. You actually have to, I believe, play 65 games of at least 25 minutes to be eligible for some of these awards as well. Now, that's not true for every single award, but it is true for a good deal of them. So obviously Jokic, his durability, the ability to stay on the floor, obviously something that most people say is one of your greatest abilities if you're available. But I do think for Nikola Jokic, he is in a prime tier here to contend once again for the MVP trophy. He puts up all of the counting numbers. He always has the efficiency, one of the most efficient players on the planet, not only from a field goal percentage standpoint, a true shooting percentage standpoint, but he's also a player who takes care of the basketball, obviously gets his teammates involved a ton through his passing out of the mid post, out of the middle of the floor. He's just really an unsolvable problem for most defenses. Minnesota did a good job last year in the playoffs containing him at times, but we even saw at times with Rudy Gobert or Karl Anthony Towns draped all over him in help positions with guys just surrounding him. Jokic's brilliance just always on full display. You think about some of his crazy shots he's hit against the Lakers the last couple of playoff runs as well. Jokic is just someone who, even when you play elite defense or great defense against him, he just has ways to solve those problems, whether it be through passing the basketball with his court mapping skills, or if it is just flat out with his ability to make tough shots. And sometimes those are his one-legged faders, falling away from the hoop and shooting off balance with that kind of catapult release. But at times it's just playing with his strength, something that doesn't get talked about enough as an athlete, how functionally strong he is. It just puts him in position here with his IQ and his skill set, his talent level, to be contending once again for his 4th MVP. We'll see if he actually gets it or not, but he is in the contention right now for me, as is Luka Doncic, another counting stat warrior here. He's going to probably be in the top 2 or 3 in the NBA once again in scoring. I wouldn't be shocked if he led the league in scoring once again as well. He is very similar to Nikola Jokic in the way that they play, the kind of pace, the deceleration, the ability to play off of 2 feet, play very functionally strong. That's one of Luka's greatest assets as a huge point guard. And I think with him as well, I think one of the biggest differences is how he asserts himself as a scorer a little bit more frequently, more consistently than Nikola Jokic. I think one of the biggest things for Luka to build off of was his 3-point shooting last season, obviously en route to the NBA Finals for the Dallas Mavericks. Now, one concern I have for Luka and his actual MVP status, if he's ever going to actually win the award, despite his continued excellence and dominance, narratives tend to hurt him in this race because he does start the season just a little bit slower than everyone else. Now, it's not like he's starting bad. He's probably averaging 28 to 32 points per game in that quote-unquote slow start. But there's just a little bit of a narrative that he has to overcome typically, where the second half of the season, he's arguably the best player in the world every single year. but the beginning he maybe was the 4th or 5th best player perceived. And because of that, he has to not only outplay the other MVP candidates down the stretch of the season, but he has ground to make up because voters specifically get kind of their presumed pick in their mind, and it's really hard to overcome that when you kind of fall behind the 8 ball a little bit. I do think Luka Doncic, you can make a real argument he is the best player in the world right now. I myself, in fact, would say that. Now, the kind of area of difference between him and Nikola Jokic and some of the other top 4, 5, 6 players in the world, you're talking about very, very small area of difference and change, right? So it's not like I'm saying he's head and shoulders better than everyone else. It's any given day he could be the best player, could get outplayed by Nikola Jokic on any given night, because these two guys are probably the most skilled players in the world, which is why, to me, they're prime MVP candidates year in, year out. They're not reliant on their athleticism. When you talk about consistency, consistency is a byproduct of skill. Nikola Jokic, so skilled, he's always going to be extremely consistent and toward the top in the NBA from a consistency standpoint, as is Luka Doncic. Now, Luka's consistency sometimes relies a little bit more on if the three-point shot is falling or not. We've seen him go through stretches where the three-point shot isn't falling and his efficiency dwindles just a little bit. But I think overall, with his ability to drive the basketball, play out of driving kick scenarios, and Dallas's improved team around him, he should be, again, a prime candidate to win an MVP this year, win his first MVP in the NBA, and really start to cement his legacy from an individual standpoint, from an accomplishments basis. Obviously, 5-time first-team All-NBA. He is very well established and accomplished at this point already, but that MVP would put him just a little bit further ahead on that legacy scale. And my final MVP candidate here of my top 3 is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And you might be saying deja vu right now. This is the exact top 3 from a year ago. These are the top 3 candidates, in my opinion, going into this season. And it's, again, like I said, very similar to last year's, because these were the top 3 finalists last season. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think, is in a prime spot once again to lead Oklahoma City as their primary ball handler, primary scorer. I think trading away Josh Giddey will probably siphon more assists toward Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, not only surrounding him with better spot-up catch-and-shoot guys, but probably just relying on his playmaking a little bit more. If there is one concern I have about OKC, they don't have an A-plus tier playmaker, but I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is still a very good playmaker. Their system is very well built out. They have a lot of skill and talent, obviously, as well. And I think if you're looking at a reason why Shai might win the MVP this year, I think there's a really good argument that OKC wins the most games in the entire NBA. And if we look historically at how MVP voting goes, oftentimes it's either the statistical merchant, the guy who absolutely dominated everyone statistically, or it's that player in his mid to early 20s who leads a team to the number 1 seed in their respective conference or in the entire NBA. Think back to the 2019 MVP where James Harden averaged 36 points per game. Well, guess what? His team in the Western Conference won 7 less games than the Milwaukee Bucks did that year. And, well, guess what? Giannis Antetokounmpo was named MVP despite scoring 9 less points per game than James Harden and averaging 1.5 assists less per game than Harden. So I think if there is an argument or a case for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to win the MVP, it would be that OKC won more games than Denver, they won more games than Dallas, they led the NBA in wins, which I think is a very realistic set margin for them to possibly accomplish. That's how SGA could really win the MVP this upcoming season. So when it comes to my official pick, so far these are my 3 candidates, my official pick for the MVP award in the 2024-2025 NBA season is Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks. I think there's going to be just a slight bit of voter fatigue here for Nikola Jokic. It's hard to win 4 MVPs in 5 seasons. We've seen guys in the past like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, James Harden even in certain extents, among many other examples as well, of guys getting snubbed maybe because they've won the MVP as many times as they have recently. I think Jokic does have a little bit of that voter fatigue working against him. And I think for Shai, the counting stats maybe just are going to be a little bit too far behind Luka from a points per game perspective. If Luka outscores him by 3-4 points per game, if Luka out assists him by 3-4 assists per game, and obviously he's going to out rebound him as well. So Shai's efficiency, Shai's winning, it's going to get him in that conversation. But I do think ultimately this is finally Luka's year to win the MVP. I think coming off of a finals run last year, maybe voting media is going to look at it and say, have we just been underrating Luka's individual greatness throughout the regular season? And now Dallas finally has the team around him that you could comfortably go in saying, hey, we expect this team to win 50 to 55 games this upcoming season. They have two really good big men. They added a sniper in Klay Thompson. Kyrie Irving continues to dazzle and be a really good running mate with Luka Doncic. So I think Luka is in a prime position here to finally win his first NBA MVP. I think any of these three guys could be very well deserving. I also want to mention Joel Embiid. I don't have him as a top 3 finalist here because of the games played requirement. He has met the games played requirement in 2 of his last 4 seasons, playing over 65 games in 2 of those last 4 years. But for me, it's just hard to bet on his endurance and his, not necessarily endurance, but his durability. And I think that's going to be something that maybe if he gets to that 65 games played requirement, I could see him winning the MVP again. Last year, he was dominant when he was on the floor. So this is by no means a slight to Joel Embiid. I also think Jalen Brunson could be a potential deserving candidate depending on how the Knicks season goes. There's a lot of great options, obviously. Limiting it to 3 players is very, very difficult, but these are the 3 players I feel most comfortable betting on from a durability standpoint and from a team winning standpoint with the statistical individual greatness in mind as well. Jumping now forward into the Defensive Player of the Year award. And remember, last year, Rudy Gobert won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year, tying him with Dikembe Mutombo and Ben Wallace as the most decorated defensive player in NBA history. And I have him as a potential finalist once again this season. I think last year, with Minnesota being so dominant, easily the best defense in the NBA by 2 net points per 100 possessions. Their defense was just stifling all year, and you look at their continuity. They did lose Kyle Anderson, brought in Rob Dillingham. I do expect a little bit of slippage just for Minnesota going into this next season defensively, just a slight bit, but I think Gobert's preparation, I think his attention to detail, and I think his effort, attitude, and mental resolve really do help him a ton defensively, especially throughout a long, grueling regular season. I think out of everyone in the league, he probably gets the most frustrated at a second quarter back cut layup. And what I mean by that is he takes every single possession extremely seriously and values each defensive possession with such a high level of importance that I don't think every NBA player in the league really holds that standard to. And I think not only does Gobert do a great job helping his team stay focused and really put their best foot forward defensively as a unit, but I think Gobert himself, his foot speed, lateral mobility for his size, things that are underrated, honestly. Yes, at times when he does get beat, he looks a little silly, but when he does, for the most part, get scored on, it's a highlight, and there's a reason for that. Anytime someone scores on Rudy Gobert, it stands out because we're not used to seeing it as frequently as you guys probably think we do. He's a special defensive player, in my opinion, the best defensive player of our generation here since 2005, since 2007-ish, if you want to go to that point. I think Gobert is just such a special individual talent. The name of the game for the Defensive Player of the Year especially is rim deterrence. It's the most impactful way to help a team win defensively, and Rudy Gobert will be around the top of the league once again in that category, not only from a blocks perspective, but also I'm not going to try you at the rim. Every single team that goes into the Target Center or faces Minnesota at home, every single one walks in saying, where's Gobert at? How do we limit his rim protection? That is at the top of every single team scouting report, and for going on nearly a decade now, Gobert continues to be a force defensively and should be in the running for maybe winning a record-setting 5th Defensive Player of the Year. But there is this other Frenchman who is going to probably give Gobert and everyone else in the league a real run for their money. Finished 2nd last year in Defensive Player of the Year voting. I do think last year the media got it right, giving Gobert the Defensive Player of the Year over Victor Wembanyama. Now, Wembanyama did have the far better counting stats last season from a blocks perspective especially, but I do think if you look at the actual tracking data and watching the games, there was times where you could tell Wemby was just still new to the NBA, and this is something that I think was very fair to expect coming in. Now, obviously, I had the highest expectations out of everyone for Wembanyama coming into the league. I called him an all-star level player. I think he lived up to that in year one, despite the team around him not really being ready to fully utilize him and fully captivate his entire skill set, especially from the guard position. I do think Wembanyama like I said, all draft process long, despite all of the intrigue and the offensive upside, he is a generational defensive prospect. That is what I have continued to say. I think, obviously it's fun to watch a 7'4" player dribble the ball, shoot from behind the 3-point line, hit the sham god while driving downhill, right? But I think the special thing about Victor Wembanyama is his ability to impact play on the defensive end of the floor. He can deter people from the rim, very similar to Rudy Gobert, but he has an extremely generational collection of agility, wingspan, length, athleticism, shot blocking, anticipation, timing, all of those things that make someone a special elite defensive player. Victor Wembanyama has all of those ratings on a 99 if we were looking at it as a 2K scale. Victor Wembanyama is a freakishly talented defensive player, and honestly is going to be in line to blow past Rudy Gobert, Ben Wallace, Dikembe Mutombo from a defensive player of the year perspective. I would be shocked if this guy does not win at least 5 defensive players of the year in his career. And another young ascending center with a very similar body type in Chet Holmgren. Now a little bit shorter, a little bit skinnier even, I would say. But Chet Holmgren is still a very special player, especially on the defensive end of the floor. I think obviously his collection of fluidity, mobility, and again, the anticipation, timing, and the ability to wall up. He's another one of these freakish defensive players. And, this is something I've been talking about for a long time. I remember going into the 2023 or 2022 NBA draft, and people telling me that they were worried about Chet Holmgren's weight and, is he big enough? And there was all these injury concerns, right? My comment section was flooded with Chet skeptics and Chet critics, and the entire time I said, look, this guy is going to be a freakish defender with really great play finishing skills offensively, and that's exactly what he lived up to in his first full year with the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think now going into year 2 with some real roster improvements around him, adding Alex Caruso, adding Isaiah Hartenstein to take off some of the load and the real center requirement for Holmgren for 36 minutes a night. Instead, now Holmgren can maybe play 8 to 10 minutes of power forward, kind of rest his body, play more as a roamer, a shot blocker. I think that will help his statistical dominance defensively, while also contributing to what I expect to be the best defense in the entire NBA there in Oklahoma City. So I think really this is a dynamic 3-man race. There was a bunch of different players I wanted to consider as well in this race. Bam Adebayo, Anthony Davis. Even if you look at some guards like Derek White, Drew Holiday, the impact that they have there in Boston, you could definitely make a case for Herb Jones in New Orleans, a player who I am enamored with. I love watching him play as well. There's a bunch of really great options, honestly, and probably 7, 8, 9, 10 guys you could argue have a legitimate case at contending for a Defensive Player of the Year this upcoming season. That's just how good the NBA is right now. I still think Victor Wembanyama, both figuratively and literally, stands head and shoulders above the competition here. I think just his length, size, shot blocking, the statistical dominance we're going to see from him, he's going to win his first of many Defensive Players of the Year this upcoming season. I expect Wemby to bring the Defensive Player of the Year to San Antonio this upcoming season. Now we move on here into the 6th Man of the Year award, and I actually have 4 candidates here because I could not decide between the final 2 who I wanted to include in this list. So the first candidate here is Malik Monk. He was the runner-up in the 2023-2024 NBA season for the 6th Man of the Year award. Now Sacramento, they do have some shuffling pieces, right? DeMar DeRozan in now. How does that affect Malik Monk's kind of usage? How does that affect his role? How does that affect his efficiency? I don't think it's going to be drastic, but I do think there will be a slight impact on overall counting numbers for Malik Monk. Will he average quite as many points per game? Maybe a slight slippage there, maybe 1 point less per game, which isn't a big deal. And it doesn't make Malik Monk quote unquote a worse player, but it does, I think, impact his 6th Man of the Year odds just a little bit, depending on how those minutes stack out and kind of how much he has the basketball actually in his hands. And how much will he play in crunch time, right? Because DeMar DeRozan, De'Aaron Fox, 2 of the best crunch time performers. Do they play a little bit smaller with Malik Monk on the floor with those lineups? I think that they should. I expect them to for the most part, but you never really know how things are going to shake out. Obviously, again, this is all assuming health as well. This is just my best prediction. I think Malik Monk should be in the running to be a finalist once again for 6th Man of the Year, as should Naz Reid. I think continuity is something that really helps Naz Reid in this argument. Not only did he win Sixth Man of the Year last year in what was a very close vote between Naz and Monk, but I think Naz Reid, looking at his role this year, it should be very well defined. I think his play last season alongside Karl-Anthony Towns, alongside Rudy Gobert, behind both of them at times as the sole center. I don't think he's really a backup center. I think he's more of a backup power forward who can play up to center at times. I think that's something that gets a little misconstrued. Everyone calls him a backup center. I don't really know if he's a true backup center. I think he's more of a backup forward, but he is still a very special player. And Big Jelly is not only one of the most athletic, dynamic big men in the entire sport right now, but he can really shoot the basketball. And I think his skill set, with kind of, again, a lot of continuity with Kyle Anderson now out, I think Minnesota is going to rely on him a little bit more even. I can see his minutes per game going up just maybe 1, 2, 3 minutes per game. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but that probably means a little bit of counting stat inflation for him as well, which, again, when you're talking about awards, that's extremely important. He's always been an efficient player. He shoots the ball so well. He's got a very quick trigger. He shoots a lot of good open shots. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton for his position. He's just flat out a really good player, and I think he's continuing to blossom and grow as a defensive player as he's gotten his body into really great shape and conditioning. He's just continuing to make more and more wild plays defensively. So Sixth Man of the Year, typically not an award that factors defense in too much, but he is growing as a defender, and I think a better defender than Malik Monk for sure. So I think with that in mind, Naz Reid should be, again, another finalist for Sixth Man of the Year. And then we get to the two extra candidates I have. The first one being Trey Murphy III. Now, part of why I'm scared and a little non-committal to Trey Murphy III, he might just flat out end up starting for New Orleans. We don't really know what their lineups are going to look like. The center position is a big question right now with Yves Missi, but obviously with DeJounte Murray, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, and Zion Williamson, those are 4 of your starting spots. And then I would have to assume that Herb Jones is also going to be starting with that grouping. So with all of that in mind, Trey Murphy III is probably going to come off the bench. Now, he did deal with injuries last year as well, so this is a little bit of projection here, but I do think with his skill set, the way that New Orleans is likely going to play this year, a little bit of a faster, more up-tempo style, I think there's going to be a ton of numbers to go around, and maybe not all of the shots are going to funnel to Trey Murphy, but I think with his two-way play, I could see voters really strongly considering him in the Sixth Man of the Year race. And finally, Steven Adams as well. For the first time really in a long time, Steven Adams is going to be coming off the bench for a majority of his minutes. In fact, probably all of his minutes behind Alperen Şengün for the Houston Rockets. So Steven Adams, this is a niche pick here. And this is where I think, again, with what I was saying about Naz Reid being more of a backup forward, I think there's a legitimate argument that Steven Adams is purely the best backup center in the entire NBA, because he's a tremendous defender. He boxes out extremely well. He's a great rim protector, and he's a phenomenal screen setter. I think he's going to have a significantly huge impact for the Houston Rockets this upcoming season, helping them win games, doing a lot of the little things well. I think his synergy with Jalen Green, freeing him up on screens, is going to be very good. I think his synergy with Amin Thompson as a box out, rebound, and go kind of combination is very strong as well. I think for Houston, who was already a top 10 defense last year, with Steven Adams in the fold coming off the bench, it's a really significant upgrade from what they were playing a year ago at the backup 5 spot. And really, Ime Udoka last year had no trust in the backup center spot. A lot of kind of shuffling, a lot of changing of who was playing what and how many minutes and what was the rotation looking like in the role. I think with Steven Adams in here, not only is their defense going to get significantly better by closing out more possessions, protecting the rim at a little bit of a higher level, and just a little bit more of that veteran presence to be in the right place at the right time. Positioning is always going to be fundamentally sound. I think Houston is just going to be a lot better with Steven Adams on the floor against backup big men. I think it's a really significant advantage. Now, if you had to ask me, do I think Steven Adams scores enough points and grabs enough rebounds to actually stand out as a Sixth Man of the Year candidate? The answer is probably not. From a counting stat perspective, he is not going to shine above the other options, most likely, for the Sixth Man of the Year award. So if I had to bet, would he win it? No. But I do think he should be really in consideration if the season plays out how I'm expecting. Now, he is coming off of injury. We'll see if he is the exact same player or even 95% of that same player. If not, obviously, then my prediction here is a little off kilter. But if he is roughly the same guy he's been over the last couple of seasons, I think Steven Adams is a premier Sixth Man of the Year candidate from a actual analysis and watching the game standpoint, and how impactful he is off the bench could be tremendous for Houston this upcoming season. We saw in Dallas, we've seen in Minnesota, we've seen in a bunch of different situations the value of really talented big man play for 48 minutes a game and how it can help you just win a lot of regular season games. I think Steven Adams, his presence there in Houston can really solidify their roster. They have one of the deepest rotations in the entire NBA, and I think Adams is going to be a really great player. But when it comes to actually winning the Sixth Man of the Year award, again, I think it's a real toss-up here between Naz Reid and Malik Monk. Last year, Naz Reid won it. I could see Malik Monk taking it. Again, it really depends on how you actually view the DeMar DeRozan addition impacting Malik Monk's role and statistical output on a night-to-night basis. Now, I don't think it's going to completely tank Malik Monk's value, clearly. I do think, though, maybe it has a slight negative impact, which would allow Naz Reid to probably kind of ascertain the Sixth Man of the Year favorite going into this upcoming season. So for that reason, I am going to say Naz Reid wins the Sixth Man of the Year award again. I do think it'll be very competitive. I think it'll be a very tight race. But these are the four best candidates in my opinion, and I do think Naz Reid, probably with just the stability, the continuity, and probably a likely role increase, just a narrow one, Naz Reid could be really set up here to win the Sixth Man of the Year award. Now moving on into our next award, and that is the Most Improved Player Award. And again, this is one of my favorite ones to talk about because this one is very forward-thinking and projection-based going into this upcoming season. You have to foresee some growth and some real performance output from where they were a year ago to where they could be now. One of my favorite options here is Deni Avdija, who was recently traded from the Washington Wizards to the Portland Trail Blazers right before the NBA draft. And I think in Portland, a team that was very thin on wing play, especially talented wing play, Deni Avdija stands out as an obvious 30-plus minute per game guy. Immediately there in Portland, I think Deni Avdija is one of the most underrated players in the entire NBA. I think for years he's been one of the best defensive wings. Now, I say one of the best, like, I'm not talking defensive player of the year or all defense one of the best. I'm talking about for a young player, he really stands out as someone with active feet, quick hands, and obviously a very high IQ of the game to position himself well to make up for certain athletic dispositions compared to other wing players, especially in the league, with how much athleticism there is in the league paired with skill. I think Deni Avdija does a very good job playing his positioning to his advantage defensively. And then from an offensive standpoint, part of what made me love him coming out in his own NBA draft class as a wing out of Israel, I loved his playmaking feel for his size and the ability to consistently look for knockdown open perimeter jump shots. I kind of likened him a little bit to Danilo Gallinari during his pre-draft come up, right? Now, he's not the exact same player, but very similar playmaking feel, comparable size, comparable athletic traits. And I think with Avdija now in a fresh situation where he's not playing with a ball-dominant guard, whether that had been Bradley Beal or Jordan Poole, I think playing next to Scoot Henderson, another really good playmaker, someone who I think still has a lot of room to grow himself. I think Avdija is positioned in a spot here to take a big step forward as not only a scorer, but also someone who's going to be more of a lead ball handler. Now, they do have Anthony Simons as well. It's not like Avdija is just soaking up 40% of the pick and roll reps, but I think it's very realistic to see him run maybe roughly 15 to 20% of the team's pick and rolls this year. He could also be a pick and roll ghost screener himself. He can maybe do some short rolling, working with DeAndre Ayton in those spots. Portland does have some talent around him. Now, Avdija is not in a prime position here to rack up 8-9 assists a game or anything crazy like that, but I could see him averaging anywhere from about 16-17 points per game, about 7 rebounds a night, and about 4 or 5 assists per game. And that's a really, really strong season and a big growth forward. And looking at how he played after the trade deadline last year, he was a very effective scorer, had some really big outbursts, a couple 20-plus point games. I think moving destinations here, finding himself in a new situation with a new head coach and not Jordan Poole, Kyle Kuzma around him, I think Deni Avdija is in a spot here to really kind of cement himself as a high-quality player in the NBA, as is Josh Giddey. Talk about changing situations. Josh Giddey goes from a terrible situation for himself. Now, obviously, OKC is a far better team than Chicago, But because of that, Josh Giddey couldn't really play his style of game, which is heliocentric, ball in his hands, playing off of his own rhythm like that, having the basketball quite a bit, playmaking, creating for others. And that showed up in his statistics last year when Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was out. Josh Giddey had most of his great games last year when OKC was without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now I think with him there in Chicago, playing next to Coby White, Zach LaVine, two really good shooters, Ayo Dosunmu off the bench who had a really good end of the season as well. Chicago's got some interesting pieces and players to work around and a lot of skill. They're on the roster now. They're not very good. I have questions about their defense, but I think Josh Giddey is really primed here to have a 17, 18, 19 point per game season while averaging close to 8 or 9 assists and probably averaging 7 to 8 rebounds. And if he's flirting with triple doubles, I could see him posting 10, 15 triple doubles this upcoming season with the ball in his hands and probably a little bit more efficient shooting, playing off of his own rhythm quite a bit. I could see Josh Giddey firmly in the most improved player race because he had kind of a disappointing season this past year, a new situation. I think a lot of eyes are going to be on him. The ball is going to be in his hands a lot. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are impressed by Josh Giddey this upcoming season. Now, to me, it doesn't really change how I feel about him on a contending team. Can you actually win with him being your lead guard at a high level? Probably not super consistently, but from a counting stat perspective here, I think he's going to have a tremendous season. I think we're going to see a lot of growth from him as an individual player, and I think his confidence level is going to really find new heights as well, which I think is also very important in this kind of discussion. So two players with changing situations around them in Deni Avdija and Josh Giddey are two of my candidates here for the Most Improved Player Award. And the final one here is Victor Wembanyama. There's been a lot of discourse about Victor potentially winning or being the most improved player this upcoming season. I have a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, we typically don't see second-year players win this award. That is very, very rare and something that just flat out does not happen. Even when Desmond Bane had his huge glow up himself, remember the award went to Ja Morant that season. Now, here's the thing. To me, Victor Wembanyama was not named an All-Star last year. He was not named an All-NBA player. What do I expect going into year 2 of his career? I expect him to be named All-NBA. I expect him to be the Defensive Player of the Year, as you already saw earlier in this video. And for that reason, I think Victor Wembanyama has a very legitimate argument to be in that most improved player discussion. It's not about, oh, what pick were you? That doesn't really matter to me. Yes, he was the first overall pick, but if he goes from not being an all-star to being a first, second, or third team All-NBA guy, that is a significant glow up at the very highest level of the sport, and that is something I do expect to see happen this year. Now, does that mean he wins most improved? Maybe not, because if you go back to year 2 of Luka Doncic's career, he ended up adding like 7-8 points per game to his points per game tally. Obviously really ascended as a player, led Dallas to the playoffs. He was an most improved player finalist, did not win the actual award, and I think a lot of voters, just like how they held kind of the second year standard against Luka Doncic, I think there will be enough voters that hold that against Victor Wembanyama that he will not ultimately win the award, but I do think he will deserve to be in the running for the conversation, and I do think he will make the actual finalist ballot. But my pick for most improved player will be Josh Giddey. I think he's in a position here to really establish himself, kind of beat out some of the narratives and some of the struggles he encountered and endured in Oklahoma City. Again, I'm not referencing any of the off-court stuff. That is not my topic to talk on. And obviously not supportive of whatever happened there. Don't have all the details. Not going to really get into it too much. But from an on-court perspective, I think Josh Giddey is going to play more confidently. He's going to have the ball in his hands way more. And I think he's really in a spot here to cement himself as a high-quality player in the NBA. Moving on to our next award, and I'm extremely excited about this one. It is the Clutch Player of the Year. And this is one of the hardest ones to predict because it really comes down to, does this player make 3, 4, 5 shots this season? And I know, yes, it's more than that. You have clutch tracking data where you can see how many points the guy scored per game with 5 minutes or less on the clock in a 5-point game or less. We have that kind of data, right? And that obviously factors into the Clutch Player of the Year. But in this award as well, it's also extremely important that you have some of those clutch moments, the game winners. You think about Steph Curry winning it last year. You think about a couple of years ago, DeMar DeRozan having a real stretch of game-winning shots. Think about De'Aaron Fox having just that incredible clutch player run himself. There's a lot of really great options year in, year out for the Clutch Player Award, because it comes down to who's hitting game winners, who's performing in the clutch, and it's really difficult to predict. But I do think there are some players who are going to be poised to have that opportunity this year, and I think that's the most important thing to look at. Who's going to be taking end-of-game shots? And Anthony Edwards is the first player I want to give love to. Minnesota was abysmal last year in the clutch. Their offense was not very good, very bogged down, and I think going into this offseason, this is, again, a very forward-thinking approach for me here. Last year, Minnesota's clutch offense was kind of so-so, struggled. Despite having a lot of offensive talent, it wasn't very good. I think this offseason, one of the biggest areas of importance for Minnesota and their coaching staff is figuring out their late game offense. And I think as we've seen Anthony Edwards evolve and grow as a player, what we've really seen him become more and more of is a lead guard. He's kind of turning from a shooting guard into more of a hybrid point guard shooting guard combination. That's part of why Mike Conley's been so effective there, is playing off the ball alongside Anthony Edwards. And as Edwards continues to grow, I think Minnesota's easiest path to improving their late game clutch offense is isolating Anthony Edwards a little bit more frequently, allowing him to be the guy, not Karl Anthony Towns, not pick and rolls with Rudy Gobert as much. Now, it's still quite a bit, but not as much. Less Mike Conley, less Jaden McDaniels, more Anthony Edwards at the end of games. And I think with that being the mindset, with that being the likely answer Minnesota's coaching staff lands on, I do think Anthony Edwards is going to have his fair share of opportunities to hit go-ahead shots, hit game-winning shots. Now, does he make a bunch of them? I don't know. He's had some clutch opportunities that he's missed. You think about the past couple against Denver, 2 playoffs ago, and then also this past regular season he had a moment like that. There's times where Anthony Edwards has not risen to the occasion in the clutch, but I do think from an opportunity standpoint, he's going to have a really heavy dose of opportunity this year, which is why he's my first candidate on the list. My second candidate, and I think this one goes without real explanation, Damian Lillard. We know what Dame time is. He's always been a clutch performer. You think about his playoff game winners, playoff series clinchers as well. Obviously the crazy one against the Oklahoma City Thunder over Paul George. You think about his game winner over the Houston Rockets in the first round quite a few years ago now at this point in time. But even once he got to Milwaukee, he brought some of that Dame time energy with him, had some really incredible game-winning shots, including the one from near the logo. Damian Lillard is just an impressive, unbelievable clutch time performer. So I think including him on this, when it comes to prediction analysis, it's really easy to settle on him as a potential candidate here for the Clutch Player of the Year award. And my final candidate is Kyrie Irving of the Dallas Mavericks. I think one of the most important trends to note for the Dallas Mavericks is the kind of nuance between Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving and the my turn, your turn kind of dynamic between them. When you're watching them, it doesn't feel my turn, your turn as much as maybe people would have expected it to. It's because Kyrie Irving's a very good off-ball basketball player, but they do take a lot of turns. Luka Doncic is the best first quarter scorer in the NBA. Guess what? Kyrie Irving is one of the best fourth quarter scorers in the NBA. Luka Doncic does a lot of work coming out of halftime in the third quarter. They do take turns a little bit by quarter. And it's funny because when they're off the floor, one of them's off the floor, the other one's got the ball in their hands and running the show. And I think Jason Kidd has managed this very, very well, of allowing both of them to be their authentic, genuine selves with the ball, making plays without stepping on each other's toes very much, incorporating them together, incorporating them separately as well. And I think Kyrie Irving, look back to last year, he had the crazy left-handed floater game winner over the Denver Nuggets. That was one of the most incredible shots of the entire season. But he was also, when you look at the actual clutch time tracking data, one of the best clutch time players. Now, he did miss quite a bit of time last year, and I do think that really hurt his legitimate shot at winning the award last season. But when he's on the floor and he's healthy, he is flat out one of the best fourth quarter performers, one of the best clutch time performers. When it gets down to the crunch time, Kyrie Irving is one of those players you want to have the ball in his hands. Think back to the 2016 NBA Finals. I think very legitimately having him on this case is on this candidacy is very, very well deserved. And in fact, he will be my prediction here for the Clutch Player of the Year award. You think about how when you're facing Dallas, first of all, there's probably going to be a good number of close games here in the Western Conference, especially with Dallas being hopefully a really competitive team. There's going to be a lot of close, tight games, and the eyes of the defense all turn to Luka Doncic. Force the ball out of his hands, make him give it up. Well, the player he's giving it up to a lot of the times is going to be Kyrie Irving. And again, I think he's in a position here with his track record of being a real clutch performer. I think Kyrie Irving, there's a legitimate argument he could win the Clutch Player of the Year award this upcoming season. The other options are all great. Anthony Edwards is going to have some opportunities. Damian Lillard, we know what he does clutch time. Trust me, this is, again, the hardest one to predict. If you had some other player in here, let me know. I want to hear all of your guys' predictions, actually. Comment them down below. I do read every single comment on the channel, so make sure to leave that comment down below. Jumping forward now into our next award, and that is the Coach of the Year. Obviously, Mark Daigneault won the award last year. For that reason, I don't expect him to be a finalist or win the award this upcoming season, even though I do think OKC realistically could win the most games in the Western Conference and maybe even in the entire NBA. Just not sure if they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. One guy who I do think will be in this Coach of the Year running is Ime Udoka of the Houston Rockets. I talked about Steven Adams and how having 48 minutes of good center play can really help your team win a bunch of regular season games. I think that's going to be a big contributing factor here for Ime Udoka being in that Coach of the Year candidacy. Very similar to how Jamal Mosley was last year for the Orlando Magic. A young team, a team with kind of questionable expectations. I think going into last season, people were expecting Orlando to be pretty good. I don't think they were expecting them to be great. Orlando ended up being great. I think Jamal Mosley got a lot of love and praise because of that. I think Houston is in a very similar boat this upcoming year. I think a lot of people have noticed Houston, but I'm not sure if a lot of people understand how good the Rockets really are, how deep their rotation is, how much talent is on that team. And I think as a product of that, Ime Udoka not only has a lot of talent and players to work with to accomplish a lot during this regular season, but I think media members will be very impressed by the year Houston has from a win-loss perspective. I think they're going to be a top 6 seed in the Western Conference, and that's very tough to be, right? There's a lot of really great teams in the West, but I could see them being the 6th seed and being just flat out a very, very talented team that goes quite a ways in the Western Conference this upcoming season, especially during the regular season itself. Coach number 2, I have Tom Thibodeau. Talking about regular season wins, Tom Thibodeau's always toward the top of that list, seemingly, because one, he runs his players into the ground. We'll see how Mikal Bridges, who never misses a game, deals with that. It's like an immovable object meets an unstoppable force. The unstoppable force being Tom Thibodeau hurting his players by playing them too much, and the immovable object is Mikal Bridges' knees. So we'll see who actually prevails there, but I think New York. I've talked at length on the channel about how good I think the Knicks are. I think their rotation is extremely deep, very strong at the top as well. That's something that I think separates New York from Houston right now. The Rockets are very young with some ascending young superstar potential talent in especially Alperen Şengün. We'll see how he grows. Whereas the Knicks presently have that type of talent. They have an all-star level player in Julius Randle, an MVP caliber player in Jalen Brunson. I think they're just clearly a tier or two above Houston from an actual talent perspective at the very top of their roster, which that's not a knock to Houston at all. They're very young and they're developing. The Knicks are a win-now-ready team. I expect them to finish second in the Eastern Conference this year. I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up winning the most games in the East, although Boston does seem just like a very, very tough challenge. But the Knicks, very tough-nosed. They know their identity. They play within themselves. They have a group of guys that really like each other. The chemistry on that team, obviously with the Nova Knicks, is very, very high. Tom Thibodeau is just a very safe and easy bet. The team has bought into his style. They're going to win a lot of games this year. Tom Thibodeau is going to be a finalist for Coach of the Year, as is Erik Spoelstra. And I think with Miami, it's an interesting situation. I think you're going to get a motivated Jimmy Butler and a team that has been really hurt by injuries the last couple of seasons. I think they're now in a position where they are maybe going to be able to put their feet forward in front, their best foot forward, and take steps in the right direction when it comes to winning regular season games again. Erik Spoelstra, we know how great of a head coach he is. Now, do I expect him to actually win the Coach of the Year award? No, because I think at best we'll maybe see Miami be the 5 seed, which is just hard to see them winning that actual award, given the expectations and the age of the roster. Houston gets a little bit more of benefit of the doubt because they're young and unproven. We know what Miami can be. We know how talented their roster has been. I think Spoelstra will get a little bit of love in Coach of the Year voting, but ultimately my Coach of the Year pick for the 2024-2025 NBA season is Tom Thibodeau of the New York Knicks. I think even though people all know how good this team is, they know how talented this roster is, I don't think people are ready for them to win 57 to 62 games this year, and that's what I think they're going to do. I think they're going to be very firmly toward the top, either 1 or 2 in the Eastern Conference, and I think with the way that the team plays and how good their roster is, how good their rotation is, and how much talent they actually have on the team, Tom Thibodeau is going to receive a lot of the Coach of the Year votes because of the type of year they have this upcoming season. Now moving on to our next award, and it's Executive of the Year, and this is a fun one for a few different reasons. The first executive I want to mention is Sam Presti. Obviously, Sam Presti has been building for this moment with his team after trading Paul George away. The Oklahoma City Thunder accumulated all of these draft picks. They got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in that trade, which is by far the most important piece. Not even worth mentioning the other ones, honestly, compared to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That's how great of a piece he was in that trade. Everything is built to this moment. The Thunder pushed their chips in a little bit. They traded Giddey for Caruso. They spent cap space on Isaiah Hartenstein. They have pushed some of their chips in, not all of them, not even close to all of them, but a noticeable portion of their chips, and their roster is incredible. They have a really, really great top 6, probably the best top 6 in the entire NBA if you want to look at it through the lens of Alex Caruso, Lou Dort, obviously Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, and Isaiah Hartenstein. That's probably the best top 6. They have other really good contributors as well on their roster: Cason Wallace, Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, Jalen Williams, the Arkansas version as well. We'll see how many minutes he plays this year, and probably not nearly as much as he did last season, and others, right? OKC's got some young guys I like, AJ Mitchell obviously being one of them. OKC's littered with talent, so this is the year now where if OKC wins 60 plus games, I could very easily see Sam Presti winning Executive of the Year. Leon Rose for the New York Knicks, obviously lead decision maker there for Knicks basketball. I just got done talking about Tom Thibodeau and how I think the Knicks could easily win 57 to 62-ish games this upcoming season with how good they are. They're going to beat up on a lot of the worst Eastern Conference teams like Atlanta, like Brooklyn, like Washington, like Charlotte. A few examples that just came to my head. Not that all of those teams are terrible, but I think the Knicks will beat up on them pretty good this upcoming season if I had to bet. Leon Rose is in a spot here where he could definitely really garner some recognition for some of his roster decisions, the ability and the decision to bring in Mikal Bridges, really fleshing out their roster after getting OG Anunoby last year, keeping a lot of their core nucleus and pieces in place. I think Leon Rose has been doing a very, very good job there in New York. And then also Daryl Morey, and this is kind of a dark horse candidate for me. I don't completely love Paul George there in Philly. I understand the allure of getting him. I do think, yes, a big name, a true quote-unquote third star with Embiid and Maxey. I do think Philly's going to win a lot of games this year. They're going to win 50-plus games. I feel very, very confident in that, which is why Daryl Morey here does make my finalist list. But I do think he is just a tier below these other options in Leon Rose and Sam Presti. So ultimately, my pick for Executive of the Year this upcoming season is Sam Presti. I think OKC wins the most games in the Western Conference, very arguably, possibly the most games in the entire NBA. So for that reason, I think Sam Presti just a very easy, obvious choice here for Executive of the Year this upcoming season. Now the award everyone has been waiting for, and that is Rookie of the Year. And this is a very interesting class. It wasn't like last year where I said, hey, it's going to be Victor Wembanyama, super obvious. Yeah, I know we had a little bit of the Chet Holmgren Wemby debate for the first couple of weeks of the season, but I think very obviously it ended up being Victor Wembanyama in the end, like I had promised before the season. This year's a lot different. We do have a 7'4" guy worth talking about, though, just like last year in Zach Edey of the Memphis Grizzlies. I do think he will be a finalist. One of the biggest things I talk about from my draft analysis to Rookie of the Year picks, they are completely different topics, okay? You can love a player pre-draft and acknowledge that he's not going to have a tremendous rookie season. Typically, those are smaller guards, players who are a little bit more reliant on quickness and getting to certain spots and really the nuance of the game. Size typically adjusts pretty quickly and pretty well to the NBA. And obviously skilled size helps even more, and that's exactly what Zach Edey is. He's a skilled big man. Now, there are going to be some real deficiencies. You guys know I did not have a lottery grade on him in this draft for a few different reasons. I had him in the top 20 on my board, so I'm not a hater. I think stylistically, you have a couple of options with Zach Edey. Defensively, you're going to have him probably primarily exclusively in drop coverage. Now, Memphis's roster construction does help a little bit because you have some really great point of attack defenders, Marcus Smart being one of them, and you also have a really elite shot blocker behind Zach Edey in Jaren Jackson Jr. So if you do want to employ Edey a little bit more aggressively, maybe at the level, hedging a little bit more, you can maybe get away with that because of the other defensive pieces that you already have on the roster in Marcus Smart and Jaren Jackson Jr., 2 former defensive players of the year. I think those players will be really, really helpful as an infrastructure around Zach Edey this upcoming season. Edey's going to have really good counting numbers. I expect him to be a double-double machine. His first year in the league, averaging 10 to 12 points a game probably, averaging 10 to 12 rebounds a game probably. He's just going to soak up rebounds. He's going to score on second chance opportunities as an elite offensive rebounding young big man in the league. Again, he's huge. He's got a great wingspan. He's got a lot of stamina, endurance. And I think playing as a screen and roll guy with John Morant's going to help him a lot, filling in kind of spots in the pocket, playing off of John Morant's downhill gravity. And obviously, Edey's hands help him a lot as well. I would be pretty shocked if he doesn't finish as a Rookie of the Year candidate, because I think he's in a really great spot where he's going to have the opportunity, the reps, the touches, and the pure counting numbers to be in that Rookie of the Year race. Another player I want to mention is Dalton Knecht. Now, I have 4 candidates here. Remember, I said I was only going to name my top 3, but I had 4 I wanted to really talk about. Dalton Knecht, another older prospect with pretty solid size. And obviously, I think there's a few factors here that really help Dalton Knecht as a Rookie of the Year candidate. One of the biggest things the Lakers needed this offseason was three-point shooting. They got arguably the best three-point shooter, or one of the best three-point shooters in the 2024 NBA draft class, in Dalton Knecht out of Tennessee. He's an older prospect, and not only did they need shooting, they hired a former elite sniper to be their head coach in JJ Redick. So when it comes to actually employing Dalton Knecht, not only does JJ Redick understand the importance and the value of the three-point shot in the modern NBA, I expect that to be reflected in his actual lineup choices, which means I do think Dalton Knecht will play a fair share of minutes this upcoming season, which is important, obviously, for his actual counting numbers and how many stats he puts up. But I also think there's going to be real opportunities around LeBron James and Anthony Davis, the rim gravity that those two guys have, that Dalton Knecht is relied upon as a set play specialist. Where JJ Redick draws up a play, I think Dalton Knecht is going to be the receiver of a lot of those actions, whether it's pin down, staggers, hammer actions, whatever you want it to be, elevators, you could have Spain action. Dalton Knecht's going to be involved in a lot of everything, I think, for LA when he's on the floor. Because I think JJ Redick, a very smart, very analytical mind, I think is going to maximize Dalton Knecht's role and impact when he's actually on the floor. Now, I can see him playing only 17, 20 minutes a night. It's going to be hard for him to put up real comparable stats compared to Zach Edey from a just pure counting number standpoint, but I think his impact could be really, really significant when he is on the floor for the Lakers, a team that needed three-point shooting. They got it in a big way here with Dalton Knecht. Another Rookie of the Year candidate I really wanted to mention in this video is Stephon Castle for the San Antonio Spurs. Now, I'm not sure how their guard rotations are going to shake out because they signed Chris Paul. They obviously still have Trey Jones, who was really good for them last season sneakily. You also obviously have Devin Vassell there in San Antonio. So it's not like Stephon Castle's walking into 32, 36 minutes a night here as a guard, a starting guard even in San Antonio. But I do think the Spurs view him as a really prime, premier point guard long-term option for them around Victor Wembanyama. And I think the defensive upside obviously is so immense. Now, again, Rookie of the Year a lot of the time comes down to the counting numbers. I continue to reference that more so in this video than I do in any of my other videos probably combined. You guys know I don't really care about counting stats as much. It's obviously about impact and some of the analytics obviously point to some of those things. Eye test is super important to me, and how I feel about players. Counting numbers typically don't move me a ton, but it's important when we're talking about award predictions. And I think Stephon Castle might be a little limited by some of his raw counting numbers, but we'll see, right? It comes down to how many minutes he earns, how many minutes does he get right out of the gate. I could see him quickly rising and earning a ton. I think very similar to how Derek White was just like a really beloved Spur, and how Greg Popovich just knew how to use him and utilize him. I could see Stephon Castle kind of filling that same-ish type of role for San Antonio pretty quickly. And with that in mind, I think his skill set as a pull-up jump shooter, I think he's got a way better handle than anyone really talked about pre-draft. That was something I continuously mentioned because I do believe in his handle, his ability to create with the ball in his hands, and then obviously function in a variety of different roles, both offensively and defensively. This is another impact player. This is another value winning player. And maybe it doesn't show up in the actual numbers, but I do think if things go well there in San Antonio, I could see him really in contention for Rookie of the Year, as I could as well with Reid Sheppard for the Houston Rockets. And no, this is not a Houston Rockets love video. It kind of feels like that, right? You wouldn't think I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan watching this one. But Reid Sheppard is just a player who I really love pre-draft. I continuously said that Houston was the best place for him to land. I continuously said that the Rockets needed a shooter like Reid Sheppard. And the only reason Dalton Knecht's not the best shooter in the 2024 NBA draft is because Reid Sheppard exists. Reid Sheppard is an absolute laser from behind the arc. He's someone who can live with and without the basketball. That was one of the biggest talking points for me pre-draft on him. I just really, really admire the way this guy plays the game. I think very, very smart. Picks his spots extremely well. Very reminiscent to me of Mike Conley a bit, who obviously now in Minnesota, but earlier in his career in Memphis could really shoot it, especially for the time period, shot it really, really well without being a turnover-prone guard and just making constantly the right decision. I feel like Reid Sheppard's going to play a very similar style, very similar type of game to that, and I think his shooting around Alperen Şengün, around Jalen Green, around Dillon Brooks, around Fred VanVleet, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, the list goes on, around Steven Adams. The Rockets, I'm not sure how many minutes they're going to be able to give to Reid Sheppard right away, but the Rockets are in a spot here where they have the talent, they have the athleticism, they have all the traits that they need around this guy. Now you implant a really cerebral, skill-oriented guard who can really shoot the lights out of the gym. I think he's in a spot here to really shine as a rookie, and for that reason, I think really, if you ask me my top two candidates for Rookie of the Year, I would say Zach Edey and Reid Sheppard. Ultimately, I am going to pick Reid Sheppard to win Rookie of the Year. I think a little bit of a risk here by me because I think Zach Edey's going to play more minutes. I think Zach Edey's going to have a bigger role on day one of his NBA career, but I think Reid Sheppard is just going to be flat out the better player between the two. I think Alex Sarr, who I don't have pictured here, is going to take a little bit more time to develop and really blossom his game, especially on the offensive end. I think Reid Sheppard is ready. I think efficiency-wise, he's going to be absolutely dominant from an efficiency standpoint as a shooter. And yes, he's a smaller player. I said typically those guys take a little bit more time. Reid Sheppard's game is predicated on his quick decision-making and his skill set. I think he's ready to adjust and play NBA minutes at a high level. And I think for that reason, Reid Sheppard will be the 2024-2025 Rookie of the Year. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy this video. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more NBA content. Really, really thankful for each of you. Again, let me know your predictions down in the comment section below, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.